Hello, my name is Pam Wilson, and on behalf of Career Partners International, welcome to our 2012 Talent Management Webinar Series. At any time during the presentation, if you experience technical difficulties, please call technical support at 1-888-259-8414. We've got a full house today with well over 500 registrants. These webinars continue to grow and are designed to share ideas, thoughts, and best practices that demonstrate the impact an organization's talent has on its business performance. Today, we will showcase some practical tools that you can add to your own toolkit to enhance your personal success as well as the success of your organization. For your convenience, we are recording today's session, and we'll share a link to the recording as well as the slides from today. We'll also be conducting several polls during the session and invite you to participate. Your answers will be confidential. A little bit about myself. I'm currently Vice President Client Relationships of CPI Chicago, Kensington International, and I work with a wide variety of clients providing talent management solutions in a range of areas, including career management and career transition, our topic today. I'm really excited to be here and host this event today. Career Partners International is one of the world's largest providers of talent management services, taking a holistic approach to managing talent throughout the career cycle. Owned and led by our 69 local partners around the globe, whose logos you see here, CPI has the largest footprint with more than 200 offices in over 35 countries. Whether assessing, engaging, developing, or transitioning talent, we take the time to understand and appreciate the difficult business issues our clients face so we can help them resolve them in ways that enhance their reputation as an employer, protect the integrity of their brand, and contribute to the organization's overall performance, as we'll talk about today. From a best practices perspective, and consistent with CPI's talent management model, pictured here, an organization's strategic objectives serve as the starting point for designing talent management strategies that really achieve results. This model simply depicts that concept and further demonstrates how business and talent management strategies are intertwined and influenced by an organization's culture and values. Today, we'll focus our discussions on the quadrant transition and to some extent engagement as we discuss the risky business of layoffs. Here's an overview of our agenda today. We'll identify key potential risks to the organization related to a reduction in force. I will be joined by 3 experts who will share their perspective, insights, and tips related to mitigating those risks, particularly in the areas of legal and financial pitfalls of a reduction, minimizing the potential negative impact on a company's brand and reputation in the marketplace, and engagement and moving forward for all employees. We'll save time at the end of the presentation to answer questions, so feel free to type any questions in the chat box, question box on your screen. Our panel of experts today include Scott Bacon, a partner with Jackson Lewis, LLC, Nick Kalm, founder and president of Reputation Partners, and John Doherty, managing partner of CPI Kansas City. I'll share a little bit more about their backgrounds shortly. During the registration process, you responded to the question, how important does your management think mitigating risk during layoffs is to your organization's strategic agenda? The slide depicts the results of that question. Keep in mind, registrants could only choose one response, and it's probably not surprising that over 80% of you believe mitigating risks during layoffs is critical or important to your organization's strategic agenda. Our goal today is to equip you with tips and tools to support your organization's strategy. Now that we know how important this topic is to your management, we'd like to launch a poll. We'll give you about 10 seconds to answer the question, what has been your biggest challenge in conducting reductions in force? Has it been informal or inadequate processes and procedures, insufficient focus on potential talent loss, managing ever-changing data, insufficient preparation time, or lack of executive team involvement? Please pick one. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. They're all challenges, and each organization probably has a different one that's largest. I think we're getting close to getting the poll response. It's building. Okay. Looks like we've got our results, and majority of you look like it's been insufficient focus on talent loss, but equally challenged has been informal or inadequate processes and managing the ever-changing data. Hopefully, you will pick up some great ways during our presentation today to overcome the challenges you might have faced in the past. While current news reports indicate improvements in the economy and the job market, we recognize that reductions in force remain a strategy that each organization utilizes in good times and in bad economic times for a variety of reasons. Despite being a normal course of business, each event impacts individuals emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes physically. These reactions can open up a wide variety of potential risks to the organization. Each of these areas of risk carry a price tag. Some might be easier for you to quantify than others. Financial risks may be the most apparent, and in fact, in the U.S. alone, there were almost 100,000 claims filed with the EEOC in 2011, an all-time high, with an average out-of-court settlement cost of $40,000 for employment-related claims. In addition, in 10% of all wrongful termination suits, plaintiffs are awarded $1 million. A recent study by Cigna and the American Medical Association showed an increase in medical claims of 100% to 900% in organizations following a layoff. You've also probably seen in the media any of a countless number of stories related to disgruntled employees attacking the organization, either through social media or, in some extreme cases, physical attacks of employees. What you might not have focused on is the potential loss of knowledge with departing employees. As workers are exited from an organization, there's also a risk that their work is not adequately transferred to remaining employees, resulting in decreased quality of product or services. Another, more obvious risk might be Wall Street's reaction to a large reduction, in some cases negatively impacting an organization's stock prices. The media today results in heightened awareness of employment information. While reductions have decreased since the peak in 2008 and 2009, analyst employment will be holding around 8% into 2013, and most of Canada's provinces holding close to their current levels, which are as high as 13%, depending on the province. This information is fueling anxiety and a lack of security among all employees, impacting their decisions and behavior both during and after a reduction in force, with a potential impact on productivity and voluntary turnover. So let's hear what our panel has to say about mitigating these risks. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Scott Bacon. Scott is an attorney and partner of Jackson Lewis, LLC. He coordinates the firm's reduction in force practice, which utilizes an interdisciplinary approach to providing advice and counsel on the cutting edge of reduction in force and workplace reorganizations today. Scott will address the legal and financial pitfalls of reduction in forces. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Pam. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's program. From a legal and financial perspective, there's a lot that can be said about the risks employers throughout North America face in reducing their workforces. Today I'm going to focus on three key topics: reducing risk by offering voluntary separations, carefully selecting employees for involuntary reductions based on job-related criteria, and conducting disparate impact analyses. I'm also going to discuss the importance of providing notice or pay in lieu of notice to Canadian employees who are laid off for economic reasons. We've got many employer representatives in the audience today. As employers, you assume legal and financial risks whenever you decide to even terminate one of your employees. As you might expect, group termination programs multiply those risks. Group terminations also challenge employers to reduce personnel expenses without sacrificing indispensable employees. One way employers can manage these risks is by implementing voluntary separation programs. Voluntary programs provide employees with more control over their employment options without requiring employers to make adverse employment decisions. Voluntary programs come in two forms: early retirement programs and voluntary resignation programs. The choice between these options is often influenced by the age of a company's workforce and the incentives the company can offer its employees in return for their voluntary departures. Companies with older personnel can offer employees assistance in transitioning to retirement by implementing early retirement programs. I'm sure most of our audience knows it's unlawful to use age as a basis for discharging employees. But you may not know that the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld the legality of offering favorable benefits to older employees. Those benefits can include pension plan enhancements, retiree health insurance coverage, and retirement transition benefits such as the New Horizons program that CPI offers. As an alternative, you can use voluntary resignation programs to offer age-neutral incentives to departing employees. Eligibility for these types of programs is usually based on years of service rather than age, and the benefits that can be offered often include severance pay, COBRA subsidies, and outplacement benefits. In most situations, employers can protect themselves from losing indispensable employees through voluntary programs by retaining the discretion to reject applicants who hold critical positions. Saying no under these circumstances isn't an adverse employment action. It actually preserves the volunteer's employment. The only time this discretion can't be retained is when employers offer enhanced tax-qualified retirement plan benefits as an incentive for participating in a voluntary program. Those types of benefits can't be provided on a discretionary basis. One final thought that applies to both voluntary and involuntary reduction programs. It's imperative for employers to require participating employees to sign a general release in return for their receipt of program benefits. Now, if you're unable to achieve necessary expense reductions through voluntary programs, additional savings can be realized by implementing involuntary reductions in force. Since involuntary programs require employers to make numerous termination decisions, they entail considerable legal and financial risks. For example, employees selected for layoff may claim they were chosen for discriminatory reasons based on their age, gender, or race. You can reduce your exposure to discrimination claims by using objective, job-related criteria in making initial layoff selection decisions. In my experience, advanced planning is the golden rule for reducing the legal risks related to involuntary workforce reductions. Before making termination decisions, it's important to review existing business units and determine any functional changes that must be made for the company to accomplish its corporate objectives after layoffs occur. Once new priorities are established, you should retain the employees who are best qualified to perform the functions that will enable your company to achieve its business goals. Companies are vulnerable to discrimination claims whenever they're required to make layoff decisions by choosing between employees within existing job classifications. This exposure can be diminished by eliminating unnecessary positions, before reducing employees within remaining positions. Next, you should stop using part-time or temporary employees before selecting full-time employees for layoff. At this point in the process, you're ready to compare employees in remaining job classifications. This should be done by making comparisons on the basis of pre-existing job-related criteria whenever possible. For example, you can begin the selection process by identifying employees with significant disciplinary or performance problems. As a second step, rank employees in comparable positions based on their ability to perform essential post-reduction job functions. Examples of objective job-related criteria that are often used to compare employees under these circumstances include productivity, proficiency, and versatility. You can promote objectivity and consistency in your decision-making by using numerical ratings in written performance evaluations to rank employees. After you rank employees on the basis of their job performance, skills, or other qualifications, you should make initial selection decisions by choosing the lowest ranked employees. Employees on company-approved leaves of absence are not insulated from layoff decisions, but it's important to make sure that employees on leave are selected for layoff based on job-related criteria rather than their physical or emotional conditions. It's also critical to document the procedures and the criteria you use to make layoff decisions. These documents are essential for defending legal challenges from employees who claim they were terminated for impermissible reasons. In the last slide, we discussed strategies for defending claims of intentional discrimination made by laid-off employees. However, group terminations are also vulnerable to claims of unintentional discrimination. Federal and state laws in the U.S. prohibit employment decisions based on non-discriminatory criteria that have a disproportionate impact on employees within legally protected groups. Employers who implement reductions in force can mitigate their exposure to disparate impact claims by analyzing initial selection decisions to see if they unintentionally affect large numbers of employees in protected groups. Disparate impact can be evaluated through statistical analysis or by using a less complicated calculation called the 80% rule. Under the 80% rule, a disparate impact occurs when the selection rate of employees in non-protected groups, such as older employees, men, or non-minorities, is less than 80% of the selection rate of employees in protected groups, such as younger employees, women, and minorities. Should your initial selection decisions result in a disparate impact, you have a choice. You can make alternative selections in an effort to reduce the disparity, or you can adhere to your original selections if they can be justified under one of two tests. Under the first test, if initial selections adversely affect minority or female employees, you can act on those decisions if they can be justified by business necessity. To satisfy this test, you must show that the criteria used to select employees for layoff effectively carried out a legitimate business purpose, and no alternative selection methods would have achieved the same or better results with less of a disparity. Under the second test, if initial selections adversely affect older employees, you can act on those decisions if they can be justified by reasonable factors other than age. In addition to achieving legal compliance, satisfying these tests will enable you to show that you've selected your best qualified staff to perform post-reduction job functions. Although the U.S. and Canadian legal systems differ in many respects, the legal concepts we've just discussed apply to employers in both countries. For example, Canadian employers conduct both voluntary separation programs and involuntary reductions in force. Canadian employers use disparate impact analyses to defend layoff decisions in wrongful dismissal cases and discriminatory discharge proceedings. In addition, offering outplacement benefits can be useful in demonstrating goodwill when defending bad faith discharge claims asserted by laid-off employees in Canada. Canadian employers also seek releases from departing employees in an effort to reduce the legal risks associated with group termination programs. Unlike the U.S., however, Canada doesn't follow the employment at will rule. This means that Canadian employers need just cause to terminate non-contractual employees without prior notice. When terminating groups of employees for economic reasons, Canadian employers must provide the employees with statutory and possibly common law notice or pay in lieu of notice. They may also be required to provide laid-off employees with statutory severance pay. If Canadian employers terminate large groups of employees within relatively short periods of time, they may be required to provide all affected employees with additional notice or pay. As a result, it's extremely important to consult with Canadian Employment Counsel before implementing group termination programs in Canada. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone in our audience for joining us today, and turn the discussion back to you, Pam.
Thanks, Scott. We really appreciate your insight, and you gave us an awful lot of information to consider. I am now going to introduce Nick Kalm, our next panelist. Nick is founder and president of Reputation Partners, which works with companies of all sizes in the areas of communications, crisis issues management, and corporate social responsibility. Nick's work includes guiding organizations through the allegations of age discrimination, wrongful discharge, racial and religious discrimination, and sexual harassment. Nick's going to give us a little bit of insight on how to mitigate the risky business of reductions in force on your brand and reputation in the marketplace. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Pam. Hello, everyone. Well, as you all know, in the past 10 years or so, reductions in the workforce among companies large and small have become much more common. While they are certainly difficult for all involved, the good news is through experience and by following best practices, companies have become much more adept at communicating through reductions in force. However, I would say there is still considerable room for improvement. Today I'm going to touch on 3 key best practices for communicating during reductions in force. First, I'll talk about how to effectively communicate with affected employees. Then I'll cover the crucial but often overlooked area of communicating with remaining or survivor employees. Finally, I'll talk about the importance of communicating with external audiences during and following a reduction in force. First, I think it's important to note that less than 2/3 of the companies that downsize achieve significant gains in productivity or profit, a significant number. Having worked with senior executives on reductions in force for close to 30 years, one thing I see too often is senior management who remain invisible. I did note in the poll question earlier that that was one of the lower scoring numbers from the audience, so I'm glad to hear that isn't a big area of concern for you. But it is a big mistake when that happens. I certainly understand the desire to distance oneself from bad news, but my message to senior management is this: you need to own the message. Otherwise, both the affected and remaining employees will blame you more than they should for the reduction. By getting out there and being visible, you humanize yourself and the decision that you made. Second, too many companies simply announce reductions in the workforce as being just simply due to the downturn or some similar generality. That too is a mistake. Rather, I think it's important to talk about the reduction in force in the context of the company's business strategy and the specific circumstances that led the company to take the action it's taking. Third, one of the reasons people resent reductions in the workforce as much as they do is the fact that companies often fail to talk about the other cost-cutting steps they have taken and will be taking in the future. This has the effect of leaving people with the impression that the only cost savings the company is taking is being done, quote, on the backs, unquote, of the employees. Think about it. The idea of a 5, 10, or even 15% reduction in headcount is a lot more palatable or acceptable if at the same time the company that is doing that reduction in the workforce also talks about canceling a big sales incentive trip or other perceived extravagance. Finally, when communicating a reduction in force, it's important to use existing communications tools wherever possible, but you also need to ensure they work. Don't take them for granted. Not just in a reduction situation, but nearly always, face-to-face communication is best. But there's also an important factor. Because people may be a bit overwhelmed when hearing about a reduction and maybe not focusing on all of the information that's being shared and important details, it's important to follow up any face-to-face communication with written communications, both from the senior-most management in the company, but also more localized information that should be delivered by local or frontline management. When communicating with affected employees, it's vital that you spell out exactly what's happened to lead to the reduction. This can include, we lost the XYZ account, or we had production challenges with ABC product as contributing to the decision. Those more specific comments, or less generic comments I should say, helps make the reduction in workforce sound a lot more well thought out and specific, which also makes it more credible. As I mentioned, it's important to talk about and ideally quantify the other cost savings the company is undertaking at the same time, with a particular emphasis on those areas that don't affect employees, such as benefits or other perks, for instance. And if somebody were to ask me, what is the single biggest mistake companies make in communicating reductions in the workforce, I would have to say it's failing to communicate with empathy. Let's face it, because of the reduction that you're undertaking, you're sending people off to an environment of 8+% unemployment, where they might have to make drastic changes in their lifestyles, move, take jobs that are beneath them, consider an abrupt retirement, etc. Acknowledge this difficulty, both in writing and in verbal communications. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting you apologize. Rather, that you simply acknowledge that what you're doing is difficult, especially on the affected employees and their families. As I mentioned, because of the increasing frequency of reductions in the workforce, companies have gotten quite a bit better about communicating with affected employees. And this is good, because there's data out there that shows that surviving employees who are disengaged are 2.5 times more likely to leave a company following a layoff. So those very people that you want to keep. An area, if anything, this group should get even more of your attention, because this is the group you're going to be relying on even more after the RIF is over. Your communications with surviving employees needs to acknowledge not only the impact on the affected employees, but on them, the surviving employees. The company is no doubt going to be asking them to take on at least some of the tasks that were previously performed by the affected employees. It's important to show them that you're taking that fact into consideration and ideally helping them cope with all of the extra tasks. Secondly, because human nature is what it is, the surviving employees are going to naturally wonder, am I next? The last thing you want your surviving employees doing is spending their days and nights worrying about their own jobs. That impacts productivity, quality, safety, attendance, and of course, discretionary effort, something any company wants in these challenging economic times. Now, it would be foolish to guarantee anything, but as much as possible, I think it's a good idea to make it clear to the surviving employees whether or not you expect to have to make additional reductions, in what areas and in what time frame. The more clarity you can provide, the better. You also need to discuss how work will be reallocated or done differently moving forward. Will certain tasks be moved to other departments? Will they be phased out? Now, what I've described so far are what I would consider to be the bare essentials. But if you want to do more than that, and I would argue that you should, this next section focuses on how you can really distinguish your organization in a positive way as you implement your reduction in force. Only a small number of companies take the time and effort to communicate with their external stakeholders during or following a reduction. There are examples aplenty of even publicly owned companies not including a reduction in their press releases or regulatory filings. That's just not smart and makes it look as if you're trying to hide something. And if your company would hide a reduction in force, people may conclude, what else is it hiding? You just don't even want to go there. No, the smart thing to do is proactively communicate the reduction not only internally, but to your customers, suppliers, investors, and more. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but doing so demonstrates both transparency and sensitivity to all of these stakeholders, all of whom are going to be affected to varying degrees by the reduction in force. When you do, it's important to explain what's changing and what isn't and reinforce your company's commitment to them. There are some other things you should consider doing. If you do some of these steps, you'll earn accolades and recognition as a good employer, even if you happen to be going through a large reduction in force. One step we often recommend is a full or a half-page ad in the local newspaper. It could say something like, proven talented employees available, and then describe the skill level and background of the affected employees from the RIF. Another step to consider is a letter from your CEO or division president to other CEOs in the area or industry, encouraging them to reach out to your Chief Human Resources Officer and consider hiring your affected employees. Lastly, as part of your severance package, not only should you consider outplacement through a CPI partner, of course, but also offer retraining through a local community college or related organization. If you follow all of these steps, you'll come through your reduction in workforce with affected employees respecting you, surviving employees refocused on the job at hand, and your external stakeholders all respecting you and seeing you as a responsible, caring corporate citizen. Pam?
Thank you, Nick. I think you shared some information for us and maybe some things that we hadn't necessarily thought about before. Now that we've discussed the potential risks of reduction in force on a company's brand and reputation, we'd like to have you take another poll related to Nick's topic. During your company's last reduction in force, with which stakeholders did you effectively communicate? The emphasis here is on effectively. We'd like you to select all that apply: departing employees, remaining employees, customers and suppliers, investors, elected officials, and community. Again, we'll give you about 10 seconds to select those that apply. And we'll look forward to seeing the results based on your own personal experiences in your organization. It looks like the results are going to be pretty interesting. Anxious to see how this all turns out relative to some of the information that Nick shared already. And it will give us some insights into what areas you might need to focus more on. Wow, interesting. Not surprising. It looks like organizations have traditionally focused their communication efforts on the departing employees and secondarily to the remaining employees. But it looks like there's a lot of opportunity to focus on customers and suppliers, as well as investors and elected officials and community members. So I'm sure that Nick's insights will give you a lens with which to evaluate the effectiveness of your communications as you move forward, as well as opportunities to create new strategies. With that, I'd like to introduce our final panelist. John Doherty is Managing Partner of Career Partners International, Kansas City. John's a seasoned business executive whose background and experiences include a wide range of talent management initiatives, including career planning and career transition. He's a certified career consultant as well as a certified life options retirement coach. John's going to focus his conversation on the risks associated with all employees before, during, and after a reduction in force. Welcome, John.
Well, thanks, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'd like to take some time to talk about not only the separated employees, but also those involved in the separation leading up to the day of notification, and the remaining employees who remain within the organization. In this next section, we'll address what's involved in preparing your managers that will be involved with the termination, how to deal with your departing employees with care and dignity, and connecting with remaining employees to keep them moving forward. The day of notification. Wow, this is by far the toughest time for everyone involved, especially those managers that have to be delivering the message. As we just heard from Scott and Nick, the key to minimizing risk, brand damage, and productivity disruption from a reduction is good planning. For all the parties involved, this can be a stressful time. And by planning and carefully thinking through each phase in everyone's role, this will allow you to conduct the separation in a manner that demonstrates, first, that the reduction was not taken lightly. Secondly, the value your organization places on its employees overall, and most importantly, providing dignity and compassion for your departing employees. You know, I can't think of too many of us that really enjoy having to terminate or separate employees we've worked with. This is an unfortunate time, and it's a time to remain calm and composed. And for the impacted employee, this can be as devastating as losing a loved one or going through a divorce. Their initial reaction may be shock or anger. So it's very important to understand and anticipate different emotional reactions. By considering the individual's particular and sometimes personal circumstances, you'll be able to act accordingly. In preparation, be sure your managers are trained to deliver the right message in the appropriate manner. You should never assume your employees will be effective in conducting the notification and delivery of the message just because they've been in management for 15 years or because they've delivered such a message previously. And from the perspective of mitigating risk, each reduction should be treated as it were the very first one ever done. You'll want to train those delivering the message every time so they know the exact message they are to deliver for this specific situation, and so they feel well prepared to handle a multitude of possible reactions. You know, no matter how many reductions you've organized, a planning checklist is a great tool to help you ensure you've covered all your bases. Some of the key components of a good planning checklist should include identifying personal potential problems and considerations. You do this by going through records, checking files, personal knowledge for information which could affect how the termination is accomplished. Such things as medical data to indicate how an employee may be affected, significant dates such as employment anniversaries, birthdays should be avoided. Likewise, check the impact of the planned termination date, how it might affect pension, bonuses, vacations, or other benefits. And of course, consider family circumstances such as illnesses, maybe a recent death or divorce in the family. We recently had a large organization that was planning a reduction, and they were sharing the list of employees included. They had mentioned that there was one woman on the list who was currently 3 months pregnant, and it was common knowledge that she had struggled to become pregnant and had several miscarriages. We urged them to defer this woman's termination, perhaps substitute someone else without presenting any personal issues, but unfortunately they kept firm and kept her on the list. Well, we were on site when that message was delivered. The woman, horribly upset, immediately called her husband, who insisted on a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the firm. So by carefully planning and with attention to every detail, you'll be able to avoid this kind of costly disaster. Other matters that you should consider would be making a decision on possibly the extension of severance benefits for those with special needs, identifying same family employees of affected workers, and of course making sure that EAP has been informed. As a follow-up to this webinar, we'll be providing all the attendees with a complete comprehensive checklist. So planning and practicing is going to be critical in that smooth transition the day of notification. So plan, plan, plan. You know, as Nick just shared, how you handle departing employees feeds into your brand as an employer. When determining which companies they want to work for, many prospective employees will take into consideration how an employee or how an organization handles reductions and treats their departing employees. So it's very important to do so with care and compassion. Once you've determined the location and the time, you'll need to decide how the employee will be called into the meeting. Keep your conversation short and to the point, briefly explaining the reason for the termination. Be sure that that reason is based on a business reason. For example, economic conditions, recent merger, maybe a strategic realignment. You may have even had a product line discontinuation. This is especially important when your company is doing well. Although you want to deliver the message in a personal manner, try never to engage the employee on a personal level, but rather refer to the position instead. Once you've delivered the message, pause, allow that message to sink in. This is an emotional time for you, but also as a leader in the organization, it's critical not to make it about your emotions. Keep it focused on the employee. It has to be all about them if you want to mitigate the risk of the situation. You don't want to engage on debate on performance or reasons for the decision. You may even want to consider having an on-site consultants to assist the employee. Best-in-class companies typically have both an EAP counselor and an outplacement consultant on site at notifications. That way, if an employee becomes distraught, the EAP counselor is trained and equipped to provide emotional support and assist the individual immediately. Your outplacement consultant helps the individual prepare to deliver this news to their family and helps the individual to start looking forward. Having a consultant on site prevents the employee from taking steps that damage the organization's brand, such as blasting bad news on Twitter or Facebook, or calling the local paper, or even placing a full-page opinion editorial. You know, there are many reasons why companies provide outplacement to their displaced employees. One of the most important is focusing that employee toward the future and away from the past. This is helpful in mitigating risk involved with reductions. These professionals can provide employees an opportunity to compose themselves and walk through how they'll present themselves when they walk out that door. Sometimes even if it's just a chance to yell at someone where it won't matter, that can be the most helpful part of the day for that employee before they face their former coworkers, friends, and family. Providing EAP and outplacement services demonstrates to all of your employees, including those who remain, that layoffs are not personal attacks undertaken on a whim, but rather a necessary part of the company's strategy for change and growth. Outplacement also demonstrates that compassion, fairness, and consistency remain a part of the company's culture both during and after a layoff. Keep in mind that your departing employee may be your customer or vendor, and there may come a time that you'll need them back as an employee. Choosing appropriate ways to stay connected to that employee will show that you care how the departing employee, where they land and where their successes are. This will go far to build goodwill and will demonstrate how valuable your organization views all of your employees, past, present, and future. At this juncture, the future of your organization lies in the hands of the remaining employees. So it's vital that they feel valued, be engaged, and work together to drive the organization forward. Unfortunately, at this time, many of your remaining employees will also feel some of the same emotional stresses as the departing employees. They'll be going through things like denial, fear, anxiety, or that anxiety like, am I next, as we mentioned earlier. Change, especially those related to reductions, can cause confusion, withdrawal, increased absenteeism, missed deadlines, and even unanticipated turnover with remaining employees who jump ship. So engaging and re-engaging the remaining employees begins with transparent communication about the reason for the reduction. Communicate with the remaining employees as to the business reason why the reduction occurred, how you are assisting the departing employees, the vision for the future of the organization, and the plan for how we will achieve that together. Like Scott mentioned previously, don't assume that message, delivering the message once to your employees in an all-hands-on meeting is enough. Change is hard, and it needs to be reinforced. Giving thorough information over and over and over, this will send a consistent message to employees and will help to rebuild any trust that's been lost or is being questioned. This transparency in communications and actions goes a long way to building trust and demonstrating the value of employees within the organization. Your remaining employees are concerned about their future and how they fit into the organization's vision for the future. You'll need to acknowledge your remaining employees' reactions and the feelings to the reduction. Most will be grieving that loss of their coworkers and responding negatively to the likely immediate increases in their workloads. Clarify with each individual exactly how their role is changing, why it's important, and the valuable role they play in the organization. Help them to see their future in the organization and discuss their growth and development, as well as their career aspirations. Many of our clients engage us to implement these types of initiatives through change management programs immediately following the reduction, career development workshops, and ongoing career management programs. In addition to the obvious benefits of a skilled workforce, employees who know their strengths and motivators from development programs are more satisfied and motivated as they can see the connection between their roles and the vision of the organization. They see the investment the company has made in them, and they are more engaged. They're going to be more apt to give more of the discretionary effort, which is critical, especially following a reduction. So beginning with the reduction, and from that point forward, many of your managers will be taxed to provide support to remaining employees, possibly in new ways. From responding to emotions of grief associated with survivor syndrome to the challenges of work-life balances and keeping employees focused and motivated. Remaining employees want to be heard. They want to be understood and recognized for their contributions. So equipping your managers with the skills to positively support employees in these varying scenarios, this may require training, new tools, and additional resources for your toolkits. And with that, I'll turn it back to Pam. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. We appreciate the insights you provided and the tricks and tips. And as John indicated, we will be sending out the checklist to all of you after this webinar later on. Having just heard about engaging employees moving forward after a reduction in force, we'd like to launch our final poll now. What is the primary reason your organization provides outplacement services to separated employees? Is it to reduce legal claims, protect the company image, reputation, and employment brand, improve engagement and retention of remaining employees, it's the right thing to do, or we don't offer outplacement assistance? Once again, we'll give you 10 seconds to answer the poll. Please select just one response. What is your primary reason for offering those services? And once again, it's interesting to see the range of responses and how the poll builds, but we'll share this with you shortly. Well, that was quick. Number one answer, it's the right thing to do. I think we've got a lot of compassionate people out there listening to this webinar. So the number one thing looks like it's the right thing to do. Also looks like a quarter of you at this point in time don't offer outplacement assistance. And probably surprisingly, only 10% are using it primarily to reduce legal claims. But generally, the polls are probably not surprising based on our experience when we look overall. Each organization's got its own reason for offering outplacement, and really does depend on an organization's strategy and culture. But I believe John's presentation has made you aware of some reasons you may not consciously have consciously considered in the past. After listening to all of our speakers today, clearly there's some key areas where organizations can focus to effectively mitigate the plethora of risks associated with reductions in force. The key is planning, and seemed to be apparent through all three speakers' presentations. From the time the decision's been made to reduce the workforce, all the way through the re-engagement of remaining employees, planning is the key to successfully mitigating risks. And I think if we look back to our first poll, that was one of the primary areas that you all felt was a big challenge, and that was the processes and procedures related to it. A prescribed and well thought out process for selecting impacted employees is crucial, as is good communications to all stakeholders about the reduction in force. Understanding and planning for the needs of the departing and remaining employees helps reduce risk and move the individuals forward. And this type of preparedness demonstrates to potential employees the value of people to the organization and helps recruit the best talent to help the organization achieve its goals. Thank you to our presenters for an outstanding look at how to mitigate risks associated with the reductions in force. Now we've got a few minutes remaining and would like to answer some of the questions that have come in from you all. The first question I think probably would be best answered by both Nick and Scott. The question is there a way to prevent employees from talking about the layoff on social media a confidentiality clause or waiver to not communicate on the matter? Nick, you want to respond to this first?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is an important question because especially today on social media, Facebook and the like, so many people are on there. One of the ways you can minimize the chatter on those kind of outlets is by creating your own venue internal to your organization where employees can vent. And this may or not be something that you're comfortable with doing, but if you think about it, this way you capture people's sentiment, and if they feel heard, they're much less likely to go to the outside world and share all of their complaints with everybody else through their social media channel. So having that kind of internal channel can be very powerful.
Thanks, Nick. And Scott, looking at the second half of this question related to confidentiality clauses or waivers, what's the legal perspective?
Pam, thanks for the question, and Nick, thanks for your insight. As I mentioned earlier during my portion of the presentation, it's always important to ask employees who've been laid off to sign a general release in return for receiving severance benefits. We typically include confidentiality clauses in those releases, and those clauses require employees to refrain from disclosing the terms of their release with people other than their legal and financial advisors. It's possible to expand the scope of a confidentiality clause in a release to cover topics related to the employee's termination. However, if the employee doesn't sign a release, it could be unlawful to prohibit employees from discussing a layoff on social media. The National Labor Relations Act protects employees' rights to engage in both union activity and protected concerted activity. Protected concerted activity occurs when employees act with other employees or for the benefit of other employees for their mutual aid and protection. Recent decisions of the National Labor Relations Board, which is the body that enforces the National Labor Relations Act, have interpreted the concept of protected concerted activity broadly. And under those recent decisions, an employer's attempt to prohibit employees from using social media to discuss their terminations with other employees would probably be considered a violation of the Act.
Thanks, Scott. This next question, I think probably is a question for John. John, you talked a lot about notification meetings, but when would an organization hold a notification meeting off-site or not at their place of business?
That's a good question, Pam. Well, today, and it's even more common today since we have so many virtual workers and mobile workforces like salespeople who are field-based. And having them come to your office or corporate headquarters can be costly, not to mention the imposition. In cases like this, it may be better to choose a local location to conduct the meeting, such as a hotel meeting room. It can also be pretty degrading, not to mention risky from a brand perspective, to have a field rep fly in for an hour meeting, plane, mad for a return flight home, of course with a pet captive audience who gets to hear how the company just jilted him or her. I would recommend considering the culture of your organization, the location of the employee, the company property that has to be returned, how that specific employee might react to make that determination.
Pam? I believe we may have lost audio with Pam Wilson. Let me just pick up with a couple of the questions that are coming in until Pam's audio is restored.
I am restored.
Great.
If we move on to probably our last question, this one is for Scott. One of the things, we have a number of individuals that either are north of the U.S. and Canada and or have Canadian operations. How does statutory and common law notice or pay in lieu of notice differ under Canadian law?
Pam, thanks for the question, and thanks to all of our Canadian colleagues who have taken the time to participate in today's webinar. The calculation of statutory and common law notice differs under Canadian federal law and the law of each of the 10 provinces within Canada. So it's extremely important to check the law of your jurisdiction, either federal or provincial, when you calculate statutory and common law notice. Whatever jurisdiction you fall under, Common law notice requirements are usually greater than statutory notice requirements. For example, statutory notice is usually between 5 and 8 weeks. Common law notice can be as long as 2 years. Factors that are typically considered in calculating common law notice include the employee's age, position, salary, length of service, and the circumstances under which the employee was hired.
Thank you. I think that's all the time we have for questions now. But on behalf of Career Partners International and our panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found this session informative and helpful. Today's session was recorded and will be available within the next week at www.cpiworld.com/webinars. Your local CPI representative would be happy to provide additional information on today's topic. Your feedback is important and ensures future webinars continue to be relevant and add value to you and your organization. As you exit the webinar, the exit survey will open in a separate browser on your computer. We hope you will complete the survey. The exit survey is also where you will request your certificate of completion for HRCI credit for attending today's webinar. We will email the HRCI recertification credit certificate to attendees who stayed on for the full presentation and answered yes to the exit survey question. Would you like to receive a certificate of completion for 1 hour of recertification credit CI webinar? In addition, I know that there were a lot of other questions, and we'll make every effort to get those questions answered offline if it's not already been done so. Our next webinar in the series will be held this summer, so please be on the lookout for your invitation. Until then, have a great day, and thank you for joining us.